Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Dan Gay, the Chief Marketing Officer of BlockSearch Blockchain, and we have a full lineup here with some pretty exciting panelists. I really am enthused to hear what they have to say today. And joining us today, we actually have Dinesh Damri, who's the CEO and Chairman of the Board of BMISC, and he is coming to us from Mauritius. And say hello to everybody out there, Dinesh.
Hello, everybody. Hello from Mauritius.
Great, and thanks
for joining us.
Thanks to you for joining us. It's 8:30, I understand, p.m. So on Friday night. But as I was just saying a minute ago, what are we going to do on a Friday night these days? So thanks again for joining us. And we also have Daniele Minci, who's coming to us from Italy, and he is the president of Fusion STX. And thanks so much for joining us, Daniele.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And again, he's taking his Friday night as well. And then here in a minute, we will have Michael Hummel, who's the CEO of Advantage Basketball Camps based out of Seattle. And he has an interesting way in which he's looking at and viewing his vision for the future. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We actually have Tim Vasco, who's the Chief Executive Officer and the founder and Chief Architect of BlockSearch Blockchain, and our leader who has, it's amazing, just 2 years ago, the vision that you had, Tim, is not because of the pandemic, but because of data and where we're going, secure IDs, et cetera, is all coming to fruition. So with that, Tim, I'd like to turn it over to you and let you kick this off. Tim.
Well, thanks, Dan, Dinesh, Daniele, Michael, if you're able to join us, and everybody for joining us at The World From Here. We started this series because we wanted to look at where the world's at realistically, where we're headed. We wanted to bring together the friends and people we've been able to interact with from around the world in a time when we're all completely affected at the same level and connected more than ever in some ways, distanced more than ever in others. And the way we do that is we get started with a little bit about where this pandemic, coronavirus, is taking us week by week. And it's astounding what we're seeing, unprecedented really in human history, with more connectivity and information about where we're at than ever as well. So let's get right into it and see what the world from here is looking like right now. Thank you again to our global panelists, Dinesh from the Indian Ocean, middle of the Indian Ocean, and right off the coast of Africa, Michael from the United States, Daniele, it's always great to have you here from Italy, where we all know is a major hotspot. Let's talk about what's gone on. What we're seeing is this continued rise. We surpassed 3.2 million cases. And what struck me earlier this week, obviously I grew up in the United States. I'm a Canadian and American citizen. I live in Canada now. But what struck me was when I was a kid growing up, a big part of my life was watching the evolution of the Vietnam War. And this week, there were more Americans that died from coronavirus than in 3 months than in the 2 decades of the Vietnam War. So it is very serious, and that death toll is rising. I don't know the exact numbers. Well, I do know the exact numbers. They're right there, 227,000 deaths so far. That's a country. It's a small country, and it's concerning. So what we're faced with is really a war that is taking us down a path where it's interesting because we're all connected in the same, are unified against this same kind of terrible situation. The We asked Dinesh to join us because Africa is this massive country. I believe it was last year, and Dinesh can correct me if I'm not mistaken, but I believe last February, it kind of just skated under the radar that Africa became the largest trade organization in the world with its trade pact between the 54 countries in Africa. I think it was called the CAFTA. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, something like that. Yes.
Yeah. So there's this massive growth. And I remember a few years ago, we were talking about where the largest employed population under 35 would be, I'm sorry, under 25 by the year 2035, and it's Africa. So a massive population of people and facing multiple crises in addition to the infrastructure that was just starting to form up, cooperation and things like that. We're now hit with this COVID crisis. So there, as I mentioned, there are 54 cases, or 54 countries in Africa. Relating that to the United States, about the same number of countries as there are states. However, much bigger population, a significantly bigger population. So when we look at this pandemic and the structure, we're really looking forward to what Dinesh is going to be able to share about what he sees in Africa. Some of the concerns that are flaring up are what's happening with schools being closed and child labor in West Africa. How are we going to keep this monitored and so forth? And I think this kind of brings us into this idea of connectivity and digital transparency in the areas where we need it. And a lot of the things we talk about when we look at blockchain and we look at how we can authenticate and create that social smart contract, and that idea that data and information like we are today is really, really available to us if we secure it. Like we're doing today, we've got people on video from all over the world, and we're looking at each other, different time zones with different cultures and everything, but we're able to use this technology to bring maybe a more visible transparency to our connectivity and what that means for our lives and our economics. When we look at Africa again, we look at jobs lost. It says up to 7 million jobs lost. I read another statistic in the United States, 22 million jobs lost in the US. So we're looking at this massive global shift. And what I believe we're going to see as we begin this exit is both a really fascinating model between protectionism between countries and borders, and maybe a bigger need than ever to cooperate in global economics. So how our political structures proceed from that transition is going to be incredibly important and incredibly relevant. We're seeing the International Monetary Fund come in with catastrophe relief, just like we're seeing many governments come in with catastrophe relief. And of course, these reliefs and suspensions of debt payments have long-term economic implications. Those implications are going to have to be addressed in ways that we've never been able to do before. In our prior webinars, we've talked about the ability of digital assets and digital transactions to help make up that, and of course, digital exchanges that fund new economic models. And I think with that, we're going to be able to look at how we start re-engineering social and business aspects. So maybe, Dinesh, you can go back and talk a little bit about what's happening in Africa and how you see these things coming forward. It'd be really interesting to hear exactly what your perspective is.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Just as you said, the first thing to say about Africa is the lack of data. So the little information you have is through the little amount of data, official data that is transmitted. Otherwise, it's through networks. You talk to friends, you talk to people you know, and this is the data that you have. So it seems that everybody is concerned about the number of cases, the number of casualties caused by the COVID-19 virus in Africa, because it probably and most likely does not reflect the reality. But what has happened in this time is that Africa is 54 countries, and Africa was never united by anything. So this is probably the first time that Africa, just like the world, all the 54 countries are united in their method, in their ways to sort of combat the COVID-19. There are two main priorities. The first priority, just like globally, is to protect lives. And the second priority is to protect livelihoods. And I'll jump straight to business and then I'll come to the politics. In terms of business, I have a lot of friends in the business communities here. And in the past, everybody was very gung-ho about shareholder value, making profits. But there's a distinct shift in the minds of the business people now. Everybody has started to care, which was probably not there before. Everybody has started to care for their fellow citizens. Everybody has started to care about healthcare, because however rich you are in Africa, or however poor you are, you face more or less the same issues under the confinement, under the lockdown. So that's a distinct change about everybody caring. And the second thing is that how do you protect your business? As you know, a large part of Africa was dependent on infrastructure. A lot of the growth was fueled by infrastructure. A lot of the growth was fueled by oil. A lot of the growth was fueled by mining. Three sectors that have been enormously touched. And infrastructure, there's a bit of a political dilemma there because it's largely funded by China. You Americans will know better what probably will happen to Africa infrastructure and China. Regarding the financial, the economy, the macro side, jobs loss, currencies will depreciate tremendously. That's a huge concern for everybody. A lot of the projects in all these African countries have been funded through government to government debt. So a lot of countries will be in the incapacity to repay these debts, which will have a huge problem in terms of the macroeconomic sustainability of the countries. A lot of the banks have taken exposure to the companies, the local companies that have been involved in these projects. And there's a big fear in Africa that the financial systems, the banking system, the formal banking system will get hit because a lot of the lending is concentrated to a lot of the industries that face serious risk today. So coming back to block search, to blockchain, to data, firstly, everybody wants more data. Everybody wants more transparent data in the business world and in government also. Secondly, how does the money reach the public at the end of the day with the least cost and with the least amount of financial intermediaries involved? And thirdly, how do you raise money? So for projects going forward. So this is the situation in terms of business. Everybody is very, very worried, but the priority, like everywhere else, of all the governments in Africa, which is there's a big sort of in the thought process between Africa and the West. See, the West, you guys are thinking about lives, but also about the economy, livelihoods. In Africa, the focus of the government right now is lives. Economy has taken a backseat. So businesses are a bit worried because the government is concerned about, we don't want more casualties. We don't want the international community to report deaths and more cases in our country. So if the borders have to remain closed till December, so be it. If the lockdown has to remain till December, so be it. Companies will find a way surely of how to come back. So the focus is really, really in Africa on lives and not much on the economy. Now, focus on lives is a political discussion, how equipped the government is, how equipped the healthcare facilities, telemedicine, big problem, citizens' daily life, education, systems have been hit, e-commerce, online delivery of food commodities, of essentials is not really there. How do you pay digital payments? Not every country has good digital payment system. So it's a bundle of challenges that are here in Africa. And everybody is going to look for solutions. So this is where we are. And everybody is actually looking for new business models at this stage in the business community.
So Dinesh, do you see like a massive transformation in things like the supply chain, authentication, and so forth? How do you see that? Like we know, and we've talked extensively between ourselves about how we can take that mobile device and we can put that in the hand of every person and start creating more inclusion and integrating these challenges that you address and that you make so obvious. And how do you think that business people will change their view now that all the what I'd call old traditional business models are broken, and really I think the weaknesses are obvious. We're seeing that they don't work, they can't work anymore, and it really does have that both business and social impact. How do you see that re-engineering happening?
Yes, of course. I'll take it in two aspects. The silver lining for Africa, if I can call it a silver lining, is that when a lot of countries are pulling out or thinking of pulling out their manufacturing from China, so Africa, a lot of countries in Africa think that they can become the beneficiaries of the manufacturing post-COVID-19. So that's like a silver lining. And to your question, it's just like Mauritius is a small country in Africa, but it's representative of what's happening. Consumer and citizen behavior is changing. And once consumer and citizen behavior changes, then you have to adapt to it. Because at this stage, when we are right now, this is people have gotten used to a new way of buying things, of receiving education, of consulting their doctor, or of talking to their bank, and talking about the mobile device, especially for payments and other applications. See, Kenya was one of the leaders with M-Pesa many years ago.
Yes.
And Kenya was the only country where mobile payments succeeded.
Actually, that came out through Vodafone. It was invented by Vodafone. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that was because Vodafone at that time controlled about 80 to 90% of the mobile phone market, of the telecom market. So there were no interoperability issues. Whereas in all other African countries, the mobile market is quite fragmented. There are a lot of interoperability issues, and that is why mobile payments have not really taken off in many of the other African countries. Banking inclusion is about, formal banking inclusion is around 5% in Africa. So you have about 95% of the African population that is unbanked today. And frankly, a lot of the banks don't want these Africans as Standard Chartered or somebody like that doesn't want, or Standard Bank doesn't want a guy who will have $10 per month as a customer. So you have this micro banking, microfinancing issues. And then banking is related to the supply chain.
On that, when we think about it, like Grameen Bank is a great example of a true success in dealing with micro banking. And that was before all these technologies existed.
Yes, agreed. So, and the other thing is, like, if you're doing a transaction of $1, you can't have 10 cents cost.
Right.
So this is why a lot of the mobile banking did not really take off in Africa because of the cost involvement. So if we have a solution where the cost is very less and the business makes money on the volume, then that could work. But it's just that it's microfinance, microbanking for 80% of the population. And it's a large rural population. So you don't have like any formal contracts in a way with a large part of the African population. But having said that, there's a rapid urbanization. This is the continent which is urbanizing the fastest at this stage. So this is
you have an incredibly young population that is the working population, as I said, predicted to be one of the largest working populations
and if I'm not mistaken,
in the world.
There are more mobile smart devices in Africa than people at this stage.
Wow, that's amazing. So that kind of tells you what the infrastructure model looks like. And as soon as we can link those devices, which we can with blockchain, to the people and start identifying and using them for all the capacity they have, I think you really do have a new economic model. And if memory serves me correct, at one point, and I'm sure it's probably still the same, M-Pesa was 80% of Kenya's GDP. Isn't that correct?
A bit less, but yes, at that time it was a big chunk. In fact, it was larger than banks at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think when we look at this, we see this massive. There are examples in the world, M-Pesa being one of them, and where when inclusion and transparency are incorporated into the model, you see this opportunity to truly re-engineer that business impact, and obviously that affects social.
And on blockchain, the other opportunity that could exist in Africa would be for smart contracts.
Right.
Smart contracts powered by blockchain, that could definitely be something, whether for land, whether for commodities, for anything, that could be something that could definitely work there. Because Africa, the thing about Africa is that it does not have too much of legacy systems or legacy infrastructure or legacy laws. So you can really leapfrog, which was the case of M-Pesa at the time, because the existing players or the new players do not really have to scrap old infrastructure, and the government doesn't have to kind of modify 100 laws to get through a new law. So it's much easier for them to adopt the new systems. So while there are a lot of challenges, you have plenty of opportunities around.
So as an entrepreneur and very successful business leader there, if you were to just summarize with all these things you've been thinking about, and thank you for sharing with us today, what would you say your approach is going to be both now as we begin to emerge into these new business models and then exit? And I know that's a big question. I know there's more questions than answers right now, but share with us like the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Where's your head gonna go? Where are you gonna take this?
See, I've always, in Africa, my main sort of focus has always been the banking and financial services sectors, especially the payments area. So this is where I would definitely be focusing. It would not be that much the B2C payment, but it would be more kind of B2B clearing, settlements, acquiring of payments. So interbank settlements, that kind of thing. The second thing that a lot of African entrepreneurs have been talking about, for us, let's say if we transfer if a Nigerian customer has to pay a Kenyan supplier from Naira to shillings, so it goes to the US, gets converted to the US, and then it gets converted back to shillings. So the banking system, but of course, I mean, the dollar is the safest currency. So that is what the clearing and settlement currency has always been. So the banking system in Africa for a long time has been thinking about how you can eliminate that layer and how you can have a more fluid kind of clearing and settlement between the Kenyan shilling and the Nigerian naira, for instance. So this is the kind of area that I'm sort of, definitely it will not be like the European Union. So you will not have like a traditional African currency coming soon, but there's plenty of room to innovate in the payments sector if we want a profitable business, because banks have money to pay. I presume they still have money to pay. So this is what I see. But at the same time, I'm very touched by social things. So I've been thinking about, like what I could do maybe in the education sector, e-education, something like that. Yeah, that's more on the business with a purpose kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And so you see that these new models will really involve a lot more entrepreneurial thinking around how we create social impact. We have to, because, and I agree with you, we have to create new ways of socially impacting the bottom line if we're going to rebuild a bottom line economically.
Yes, because in Africa, the thing that a lot of us are worried about right now, so you have a sanitary crisis that is leading to an economic crisis. What everybody is fearful about is that the sum of these two leads to a social crisis.
Right.
Nobody wants it to go there. So therefore, everybody has to play their role, whether it's a government, whether it's a business, whoever, and to make sure that the economic crisis does not deteriorate into a social crisis. Because if it does, then that's very problematic.
Exactly. And I think that's, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's a huge part of the world. Africa is a significant supplier to the world of goods, services, food, all kinds of things. It's an interesting perspective, things that I hope everybody really hears about the message you've shared with us today, where we look at this massive population, the distribution of the possibility of new manufacturing capacity in Africa, decentralizing from China, things like that. So it's been a fascinating dialogue, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us, along with this idea of social structures and what's happening. And that kind of leads right into our next topic, which is it's fascinating that the mass gatherings that as people, where we do have these social environments, are so used to things like the Olympics, for example, which have been canceled. And, that has always brought us together. The interesting article that the Olympics may be canceled even in 2021. The idea that sports, which have always brought us together as nations, as countries, behind our favorite teams, for our social, cultural entertainment, no matter what that sport is, the common theme has been gathering and coming together and supporting that end goal. And maybe sports are so great because you can see the game played and there is a goal and there's a clear winner and loser, and it's done in good spirit. Sometimes not so obvious in business. So, and a lot of other parts of our lives. And maybe that's why people love it so much. But when we start seeing this, when sports are empty fans and the fans don't have anything to get behind. My father-in-law is a massive sports fan. In his retirement, I would say that's what he's done, is become more of an expert than he already was on every statistic in every sport. I don't even have to watch sports. All I have to do is talk to Joe and I'll know everything about any sport anywhere. So it's interesting. And I asked him the other day, I said, how you doing, Dad? What are you watching? And he just kind of grumbled at me. So it's very interesting to look at how this will affect our social economy. Not only is it an issue, it's a big financial business. So going back to business and social, sports has always been about business. We hear about the contracts, we hear about the dollars. And if you can imagine what these stadiums might look like if we were to have to social distance in there, as one article said, separated one seat apart and every row. Now, in my opinion, I don't really know if that would work, because I've been to plenty of games where people are flying across rows anyway and screaming at the top of their lungs and spitting. So I'm not sure that one seat or one row would make much of a difference. Certainly less packed stadiums, and that boils down to less revenue. It boils down to less operating capital for these teams to put on the show, because at the end of the day, it is a show. So today we have our expert in the sports industry, Michael Hummel, and Michael can talk to us a little bit about what he sees. Michael's business has been involved in training kids, again, the education sector, only on the sports side, with some of the most famous and successful players, coaches in the North America and the world. So I'd like to welcome Michael. Thank you for joining us. And Michael, maybe you can share with us a little bit of idea on the social side and business side of this massive industry that I know so many of us are missing and wondering, okay, what next? How will we ever see our favorite players and teams participate again? And Daniele, I know you'll be interested in this because you were a professional footballer or soccer player. So Michael, welcome. Is Michael with us?
Yeah. I think he's mute.
Yeah, just unmute, Michael.
Can you hear me now?
There you
Oh,
go.
we can. Yes, we can.
Hey, all, thanks for having me join you. So it's, you bring up a really interesting point, and that is, where are we going to go from here? How are we going to open all this back up? And so there's lots of discussions about that. You've got players that obviously don't want to get sick, and they're being paid whether they play or not. Then we have players coming in that are rookies and desperate to make a name for themselves, and they want to start playing now. You've got a tremendous amount of money that's kind of controlling all this. And how do we do this? The most recent idea is going to be to do it at Disney World, because they have all the dorms where they can isolate the teams and they can play the games without fans. So at least that would open it back up, and it's a way to do it. But a lot of it is why is all this sports so important to us? And it's like you're talking about your father-in-law. Well, we get to compete. We get every Sunday, it's Go Hawks. I get
Right.
to be part of that. And and especially now when we're locked down, that's a huge missing piece.
Right.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was
Well,
just
also
saying,
community.
I agree. I think it's fascinating to think about that. Like it is an outlet, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the other answers range and go into a deep dive. That's kind of one of the most basic one of them. And we're going to move into, esports is going to be a massive emerging industry. I mean, it already is. We've got gamers that are making $1 million a month playing video games.
Let me stop you, Michael, because this happened to me. Somebody said esports, and I'm like, oh, that's broadcasting. That's broadcasting sports. Of course, it's big. And all of a sudden, I felt like I'm a tech guy, and I kind of felt dumb when my millennial kids laughed at me. So could you just back up a minute and explain esports? because there's a lot of people out here who may not even know what it is. But what I did learn is how quickly I wanted to know about it, because it's bigger than the NFL now.
Yeah.
So especially now.
Yeah.
So maybe explain a little bit about what esports is, and then your philosophy on how that might take us forward.
Yeah. Well, how many people didn't know about cell phones when they first
Right.
started? So we all know about esports. Where to start? I went down a couple months ago. I went to a Mikey Garcia fight down at Ford Field. Right across the street from Ford Field in Dallas was the GameStop esports professional center where they run these games. And so I went in and toured all that, and it's amazing how much money's behind it.
Right.
So you've got people, well, you're connected with Microsoft. Microsoft just, I can't think of the name of it. Mixer is going to be their new streaming service.
Okay.
Their streaming service right now is Twitch, and Twitch is where all of these gamers will go and play. All right.
Mhm.
So my son's a professional streamer, so he'll log on to Twitch and start playing video games, and people from all over the planet will watch him.
Wow.
Well,
Wow.
Ninja was the #1. He was making, it depends on the month, but to say $1 million a month is pretty kind of average for him. Well,
For
Microsoft,
playing a video game.
yes, playing a video game. I told my son for years, son, you can't make a living playing video games. Well, now he is.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
Dad,
So,
missed that one.
and it's a way, we get so bogged down in doing what we do because we have to do it. It needs to be done, that we lose sight of our endpoint, which is our, our vision that we know is coming and we'll get there. Esports is going to be it's already bigger revenue gaming than the professional sports industry, but it's going to be massive. So
It struck me years ago when I was at a Microsoft conference, actually, and Xbox at the time, and this is quite a few years ago, probably like 2011, I'm going to say, Xbox at the time had 30 million connected users. So I remember distinctly being in that discussion and realizing that is as big as the country of Canada. And that was back then. As you say, we have these preconceived ideas about what you can do to make a living and what you can't do to make a living. But I think if you listen to Dinesh and we start looking at where we're at today, there are no boundaries anymore of what you can do to make a living. And maybe esports is a really good example of that. Or Facebook influencers, my kids show me, or TikTok and things like that, that are emerging as new digital economies, really. And do you think that, I know what we're working on, and I won't talk too much about that right at the moment. We'll release that at the appropriate time. But do you think that this kind of idea of merging digital, maybe what you're saying, what's going to happen in Disney World, or what's being contemplated, merging that whole idea of we can be in stands, we can be like this, and we can be participating, even if we aren't physically there, we can be really immersed in it. Do you see that happening, and how do you see that coming forward?
Well, yeah, it's not a lot different than us turning on the TV to watch our Sunday football game.
Right.
These kids are using their cell phones and logging onto computers to watch these esports. And Tim, it goes even much deeper than that. So I can't think of his name right now, but YouTube. All right, the #1 YouTuber. He does contests. He just did I can't think of it.
Oh, that guy. I know who you're talking about.
I know. I'm trying to think
I can't
of
think of his name either. My daughters were showing me.
rock, paper, scissors. There you go. He did a rock, paper, scissors contest, $250,000 to the winner.
Yeah.
He got, I can't remember, but millions of views on that. He's tipping, people are delivering pizzas. He's given them $250,000 tips when they deliver the pizza. He gave them a house. Okay. Yeah. 5 people, put your hand on the Lamborghini. Last one to take your hand off the Lamborghini wins the Lamborghini.
Right.
Okay. What type of a business and revenue stream can do this?
Yes, exactly.
He's making 100 times the cost of the Lamborghini he's giving away.
Somebody just texted me and said that is Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast. I got it written down in my notes, but I'd have to focus on the notes to find the name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Beast, you know. I saw one of your, somebody texted New England owners, Bob Kraft is a huge supporter of esports. It was when I was down at the Dallas Center, we were coming out of the esports center, and I saw a guy with the Patriots hats on, and all this stuff was going on over at the Ford Field. And he goes, "What's going on over there?" And I said, "Oh, well, that's the Tom Brady signing. Dallas just signed Tom Brady." He started.
Wow.
It was kind of mean.
Great.
But I resisted.
That's great.
Yeah.
Danielle,
Well, I was just going to say, esports is also an extension of the sport. You know, so your team is actually represented in esports. It's something that you can get involved in and actually play yourself. So it's a great extension and a great revenue model for actual sports, as we're talking about too.
Yeah. Well,
Daniela, you were a soccer player. What do you think about all this?
I think esports it's also a potential new revenue stream for professional teams. So especially not for the top clubs that they already have diversified lines of revenues, but I was talking to minor league clubs that they struggle now to see the way forward because TV rights and spectators will be less and less over time. So they don't have anything else in their P&L. So, and for example, esports and academy, it will grow, in my view, dramatically as a key differentiator into their top line of revenues because they need to find a way of self-sustaining themselves with something new. Esport is not new, actually, is very well positioned to welcome new people to the party. So I judge very welcome. I'm not into the esport. Actually, yesterday, for the first time, I watched my first F1 Grand Prix esport game because I was watching the movie. I was watching in Sky, and I've seen Ferrari was in the first position in a Grand Prix fashion that I did not realize. I remember all the Grand Prix by heart. And they say, that's something new, that it was an esport, actually.
Wow.
It was so good. The quality was so good. There were the marshals next to the tracks. So the quality and the experience, it's almost the same as watching a live event. So as long as the quality will get to this level and even better, I mean, people will not feel the difference between a live streaming activity and an esport. Because the experience will be similar.
What strikes me is this idea of the business model, as you brought up, and this digital asset. I do know that in gaming, the idea of tokens moving around, I couldn't believe when I heard some of the revenue models early on with one of my cousins actually builds video games. He's an engineer for video games. He runs a lot of the big ones. And we were talking about it, and Greg was telling me how these gamers pay for tokens. And when I heard about esports and it was brought up to me, and then Daniela, you talked to me about the soccer clubs wanting to change their model to a digital asset. Then Michael came along and said, here's what we could do with basketball and camps and sports and so forth. It kind of clicked. I'm a slow learner, but I'm thinking tokens and digitizing all of this, breaking it into this digital model, allowing these organizations to create their utility and their digitization of their model and bring that to their fans. Now all of a sudden fans have a whole new way of supporting teams, not only watching, but supporting teams, really getting behind players, voting for them, all kinds of things. And my mind just went off, and I'm like, wow, I can truly see where tokenizing, that's a term we use in the blockchain world all the time, tokenizing and sports and kind of that passion we have as humans to get out there and, as you said, Michael, compete, right? Compete even if we're not on the field. It really is a new way of approaching and thinking. That's maybe where we're headed for one of these recovery areas that we'll see emerge.
Well, and Tim, it's also community and connection.
Right.
And that's a huge thing that we're all lacking right now, and it's a way that we can continue to be connected with others. So I think that's a big piece of it as well.
There was a missing piece there because there are many experimental steps into introducing tokens into the esport or esport like.
Right.
But in the let's say in the last couple of years, there were experimental activities done by people in the ICO timing, introducing a kind of utility token into an esport game to self-sustain the adoption, the economy, and so on and so forth. What we have now at stake is much more powerful because people can really, through the tokenization, introduce a model. Could be, you know, a very financial product like derivative or like a future, but to include in the game sponsors, investors, so as it's not only about gamers, you know, and the people that play in the game, but also the people that have a vested interest to grow inside the community, not being a esport or whatever sporting specialists. So by introducing a token, so investors and also gamers can have a financial advantage as a cut of the growth into the community. And for especially second and third tier teams, this is an opportunity right now to tackle, or at least to educate and to see what's going on, because this will create a sustainable revenue differentiator.
That's an interesting thing. So really what we're talking about is this idea of re-engineering the business models that we're at. So let's kind of shift a little bit to, okay, so this is the world from here, exit strategy, and where do we go? And right now we're saying, what is re-engineering going to look like? This says it's going to be with us for a while, if not forever. How are we going to restructure these areas on how we live and so forth? And when we look at this, we look at these, Dinesh brought up that right before we started this, that the lockdown in Mauritius until June 1st, we're seeing stay-at-home order until May 18th yesterday, loosens restrictions for retail. We know that there are restrictions loosening, but it's not gonna be anywhere near the same. So we're kind of looking at the economics and what economists are saying and predicting. But what I love about what we're doing right here is we're business people. Like everybody on this call is a business person. We're affected like everybody else. We're entrepreneurs, and we've made our careers and living, all of us, at being innovative. So while economists make the predictions of what's going to happen, what I'd like to do is shift into, okay, guys, what is your prediction? Where are we going to take this? Dinesh, you've been extremely successful at what you do there in Africa. What I'd like to do is hear you talk a little bit about what's your prediction? Like how you told me a bit about your background, and I know that you're sitting there thinking, and the neurons are firing, and you're going, this is where I'm going to go next. And Michael, you're on the hot seat next. I'm going to ask you the same thing. But come on, guys, like how are we going to, we're here. We know it's here. We know what the risks are. We've assessed that. We're entrepreneurs. How are we going to, where are we going? What would you like to share about that?
Yeah, so from my side, you know, if I speak about Mauritius and many African countries, the predictions are much worse than what you have shown. It's 1% per month, 1% contraction in the GDP per month till normalcy is resumed, and nobody knows when normalcy is resumed. So our traditional economies are definitely gone for a good toss here. But in every challenges, you have opportunities. Just like you were talking about esports, you were talking about tokenization. I can't talk for the US, but I can definitely tell you in London. So this is the trend. Even before the COVID, esports was already adopting tokenization as an important means for financing. And the laws were already sort of being put in place there. So we have to reinvent, Tim. There's no other way. And this is where you have opportunities, but like whenever you talk about blockchain, you talk about financial systems, you have regulators, you have authorities, and they all have to play the game. Otherwise, God help us. So
well, and it's right there
on.
on this next slide, which is change enablers. So how are you going to enable that change? Like what are you going to do?
What I'm doing,
next step.
What I'm doing, of course. What I'm doing in Mauritius is that, Mauritius, while tourism accounted for about 25% of our GDP, and this is how it interconnects with Africa, is that I'm working with a group of people here very closely with the government, with the regulators, to see how we can modernize our financial systems. Maybe we talked about digital assets, we talked about blockchain technologies, and Mauritius has always been a major source of capital flows into Africa and out of Africa. So if Mauritius gets its, as a financial center, gets its play correct, the financial sector will definitely overflow into the African financial systems. So this is really, I am trying to reinvent in the financial system so that we can, once the COVID is we are bound to come out of the COVID, whether it's in 12 months or 18 months or 24 months, but we should be ready by then. And when I talk about financial systems, it's like reinventing entire business models. Like in Africa, you have a lot of suppliers, as I said, farmers, fishermen, breeders, etc. Their produce go to the supermarkets. From the supermarkets or the shops, they go to their consumers. Now all the supermarkets and the shops are closed, for instance. So all the vegetables produced of the farmers, all the chicken, all the beef, all the meat are all not getting to the consumer. So we'll have to reinvent the entire business model and reinvent. If we do not, that's it.
Well, and I agree with that. And I think it's fascinating that you bring that up, because when we talk about these new business models, we talk about everything. And you mentioned earlier the idea of the smart contract. And really, Dan told me he was speaking with one of our partners who's an attorney the other day, who's doing court and appearances and depositions and things like that digitally. But in addition to that, we're going to see these smart contracts not only making the process more efficient, but also the transparency more efficient. Maybe there will be less waste because of court time and broken contracts and broken promises. And it kind of all comes around to that trust and that authentication and knowing yourself. In particular, maybe earlier what you were talking about, where when we get into the broader countries of Africa, out of somewhere where you can build the infrastructure like Mauritius, authenticating and making that a more secure way to get there. So I can see where, when I first came to Mauritius, the reason I came there was the interesting statistics about Mauritius is it was rated by the World Trade Organization as the #1 country in Africa to do business. But what maybe a lot of people don't know that are watching this, it also is the largest foreign direct investment country into India. So you're sitting like right between multi-billion population or countries that have these mass populations and economics flowing back and forth.
Yes, correct. And this is where the opportunity for Mauritius is. The opportunity is really for Mauritius to become it's already a good financial center, but to take a leadership role as a nerve center for digital assets and blockchain technologies in financial systems. That's where I see the future of Mauritius. That's where I see jobs for the youth in Mauritius, and I see jobs being created indirectly in banks and other financial systems in Africa.
Well, it's going to be exciting, and I feel very honored to be able to work with you and the team over there. Joel, who brought us together, is a true champion, and so thanks for sharing that with us. And I'm going to ask Michael the same thing. Here you go, Michael. You're the sports leader, the visionary. You're taking kids, you're thinking about them. We talk quite a bit now about how we're going to get these kids out of the house and back onto the basketball courts and fields and so forth. What do you see as your strategic vision? I mean, you've been doing these basketball camps, you've been feet on the street, now you're fingers on keyboards. I mean, where are you headed? How are we doing that?
Big transition. So
yeah,
in every tragedy lies the seed of opportunity. I mean, so in history has shown that again and again, that the telephone was waiting for Bell. The light bulb was waiting for Einstein. Working from home in this transition has been waiting for a Tim Vasco. So it's kind of, you have that end point that you look at. And for me, that end point is going to be, instead of reaching thousands of kids with my mission statement, I'm going to be able to reach millions of kids.
Right.
So
right.
To me, this is an opportunity that's beyond exciting. So the way I see a lot of that transitioning and happening is a lot of the things that we've talked about. And that is, we can set up, I can't remember what you call all of them, but like your Be Certain, your wallet, where you can authenticate all these kids, you can authenticate their parents, you can authenticate the coaches that are working with them. And we will move to online training videos, training, streaming, working with the kids on positive motivation statements and how can we help serve them in that way. And so, and again, I do one camp, I reach a couple hundred kids, and that's amazing. I mean, I'm so blessed to be able to do that. I got to not grow up. I got to stay in a basketball gym, play basketball with a bunch of great guys that love the game. We do 8 hours in the gym, and the kids would leave, and we'd play ball for 2 hours.
Right.
Play at lunchtime. I mean, we got to do what we love doing.
Yeah.
That's still going to exist. It's just going to be, I don't know, different. And how that's going to look exactly, I won't know till we get into it. But I do know that we can take that dream and vision that we work with these kids, and we can put it online, and we can reach millions of kids at the same time instead of a couple hundred.
You know, and you bring up a point that struck me as you were talking there. I was thinking about, I remember I was in London, and there was I think it was an NFL game that, and so I think these sports franchises in the United States, where they have gained such notoriety and big business opportunity, we're looking at internationalizing anyway. Do you think that'll maybe drive a faster penetration globally, maybe even more continuity around the world of how we compete? You've got, I can imagine kids e-gaming, you know, playing on their basketball hoop at home, outside in the garage in Seattle or where you're at on the West Coast against somebody in Mauritius, and they're like, okay, let's go, let's do some layups, let's see. What do you think about that? Is that going to happen?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just like, okay, into practice, free throw shooting contest. Okay, winner, right. Vote for your winner, 10 lines, go, you know, that kind of stuff.
I mean, think about it. We got GoPros, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll have a free throw contest that instead of 2 people, we'll have 2 million people that are involved in this.
How cool is that?
Oh, it's
like, you know, that's so cool. And when I hear you guys talk, I get really excited about what we can do with technology and entrepreneurship and out of the box thinking. And I think that's what I've always loved about entrepreneurs and hanging around you guys and coming and meeting you face to face or now digitally, but how cool it is that you just go, wow, you know, and you share these ideas and these big visions and dreams. And probably the hardest thing, as we all know about entrepreneurs, is taking those dreams and distilling them into executable steps, and frankly, getting the capital behind those dreams is always a challenge, as we've all experienced. Anybody who's been an entrepreneur, we know that. And so it's just super exciting, Michael, to have you here talk about this. I love this picture with all these kids showing what that gathering looks like. now imagine that by the millions in a digital environment, and that same kind of continuity and community in an authenticated way, in a secure way, where we don't have to feel threatened about being Zoom bombed or something like that. I think, you know, I love the vision. I just think it's super exciting.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're working 18 hours a day, every day, struggling to keep up with everything, you get bogged down in that. And you do lose, you know, your vision. So what you're seeing there is was my mission statement. I want to reach these kids in a PC world, politically correct world, where everybody gets a trophy. Well, that's just, I'm sorry, it's not reality.
Right.
We need to prepare these kids for what life is going to throw at them, you know, and everybody doesn't get a trophy. You get a trophy for showing up, I guess, but you know, what happens when you don't win and you get knocked down? You got to get back up again.
Right.
You got to get after it. So I was at a Storm game, and I'm going down the aisle, and some young lady screams my name, runs up, throws her arms around me, tears in her eyes, and proceeds to tell me a story of how my speech saved her life. And she wanted me to meet her husband and her kids. And oh man, I mean, it's hard not to cry when I talk about that. Well, whatever I said, it was something that she needed to hear at that moment. And that she kept coming back to my camps and hearing the same positive messages. Well, there's, I think that was Bellevue, so there's about 300 kids sitting there. But what if there was 100 million kids sitting there hearing that message?
That's right. And maybe that's the big part about what we're talking about today, is hearing this message and sharing this message. That's why we're all here today. I mean, we're all taking our time. Dinesh is ready for his glass of red wine, as is we know Daniele, because he's in Italy. And we're here because those kinds of messages are all about these business model changes. Everything from our, you know, business and what's the cheat sheet for business and the strategy of getting out there. How are we going to change, you know, that? What are we going to do to change things like the legal system and, you know, make it more valid and variable? We'll talk more about that in an upcoming session. And of course, today we weren't able to have Dr. Zaid. He's in surgery right now. So thank you for all the healthcare workers, especially our associate, Dr. Zaid. We couldn't be even thinking this way if we didn't know that our health was being taken care of by the people on the front line. So we'll invite Dr. Zaid to come in and talk about that. We're going to talk about how these shifts of shopping experiences and what the future is going to hold for how we get these services and how we make payments and all of that. These are all part of the future digital disruption. And I'm kind of scrolling fast here because we're running out of time. But what I want to assure everybody is that there's so much to talk about, that we will be bringing these forward, and we'll be talking about what the predictions are and so forth in the world as we move more towards this remote work, this remote business model, and areas for education that I know any of us who have kids are dealing with. I've met Daniele's daughters now. You heard my dog earlier. He hangs out with me all the time, and he decided to speak up today. So, you know, we've got these great new opportunities. That's my daughter down there in the right-hand corner, and studying at home, really intense. And yes, I did get a release to use that. So one of the big parts about all of this is going to be how we secure our online privacy protection and data. And that's really my job, to help bring these models to you guys as entrepreneurs and say, how can we build a new kind of infrastructure? How can we build a new model that actually allows us to create these distributed and social business models? We've been doing this at FlockCerts now for 7 years. That's how I got the opportunity to meet all of you, traveling around the world. My traveling now is is very digital, and that's a bit weird for me, for a guy who spent 33% of his life in hotels and airplanes every year, to be at home all the time. But it always makes me think about how fortunate I am, especially when I think about this. I share this every week, but the areas that are hit the hardest, our hearts are out to everybody. We know that we're bringing optimistic thoughts here, and I think the world needs a bit of optimism, but we don't want to forget our heroes. We don't want anybody to think that we don't realize how devastating this is, how trying it is for the people. And thank God for those YouTubers and those people who are out there putting hands on Lamborghinis and bringing hope into the world, because that's what we need more than anything. And when you watch us, when you hear us, being an entrepreneur is about hope. Like, and I read there was a book out one time that's like, it was called, the title was Hope is Not a Strategy. And I disagree. I think hope is the first strategy. We come up with ideas, we come up with these thoughts, we come up with dreams, and we hope that we're the people that can actually build this. My hope is that working with groups like this, with people all over the world that are thinking through this, is that we can build a better place. And I love this quote. Dan chose this one this week, and it's brilliant because it says, we shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive at the place we know for the first time. T.S. Eliot. And, you know, it's true. This is a new world. This is the first time we're going to see a lot of these. Before COVID, I read a stat that 65% of the jobs that our children will have don't yet exist. I would say today, that's about 80% or 90%. We have a big job ahead of us. We're entrepreneurs. We create more jobs in the world than anybody, with less resources than most. We create more impact on the economy with less access to the economy. In Dinesh, in Africa, I reported that 2/3 of the world's food come from 1/3 of the population of Africa and 1/4 of the land. And, yes. And yet those people that produce that food are the largest starving population in the world and the most poor. So if this pandemic has made us think of one thing, think about the heroes who go to work every day in the hospitals. Think about the heroes who go to the field every day to try and feed their families, but do a darn good job of feeding the world with too few resources. And maybe let's think about how we end up, for the first time, creating a world where there is more inclusion, whether it be for sports and kids who can't show up for a 200-person camp, but maybe they can have access where they never had access before, Michael. And you can change more lives, as you said, than before. And maybe, Dinesh, we can take these mobile economics to those mobile devices that have more people or more devices than there are people. The infrastructure is here. That's what we're all here for. And guys, I just can't thank you enough for every week inspiring me to be better, encouraging me to think more, encouraging everybody who listens to this to think more about, hey, this is the world we're in. It's what the universe has handed us. Now, what are we going to do with it? That's what we do every day. Michael, at some point in your life, somebody handed you a basketball and you started bouncing it. And Dinesh, somebody handed you a ledger. I don't know.
Something.
And I know they put a soccer ball in front of Daniele, and another sports guy, Dan, who still holds the record for hurdling, in case little known fact, holds the record for hurdling and was on the Olympic training for sports. He sits down, but he's quite tall and lean. He's really slow on the ski slopes, but other than that,
ouch.
we have a good competition, or had a good competition going when we could go out and do a sport we love. And, you know, it is about that competition. It's also about coming together. So guys, thank you for coming together today. It's been really, really enjoyable. And thank you. Yeah. Congratulations to all of you guys for what you're doing and being true heroes. You're my heroes. And I really appreciate everything all of you guys do. And talking to you every week really gives me a charge. This really is exciting.
Agreed.
Appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just
Thank
some
you, Tim.
takeaways that I had written down. I know we've run over, but just quickly, Dinesh, from your talk, Africa, new manufacturing, smartphones are ready there. London tokenization for financing, and Mauritius being the blockchain to lead financing. And then really the big thing that I took away from something I saw on LinkedIn from you yesterday is that one of your statements, care versus profit. And I think that's huge, and something that, to me, I believe that the world had to go through this so that we would start caring again. So great information there. And then Michael, in every tragedy is the seed for opportunity. And what you do for kids, just amazing. You know, touching one person, amazing, but touching thousands, even more so. And if you can touch 1 million, just incredible. So, and instead of reaching thousands, touching and reaching millions, and then making a difference in kids' lives, and we can tell that. And it's very touching what you do. And then Daniele, tokenization for derivatives and financial and invested interest to grow inside the community. And in not esports, but with sports teams, the ability with tokenization and this new model to get to second and third tier teams to really create revenue and differentiation. And every week, Daniele, I'm just very excited to hear what you have to say, because you have just such a great perspective from another part of the world than what I live in. So with that, thanks for joining us. You can watch us and listen to us on Twitter at Tim S. Fasco or at BlockSearch Buzz. And then if you have any questions or anything, please send us something at info@blocksearch.com.
Or join our Telegram group.
And our Telegram group, which is blocksearch.com as well. Thank you, Tim. And thank you. Very enlightening conversation and presentation. Thanks, everybody. Great meeting.
Thanks, everybody. And we're back at 9:30 on next Friday for our podcast, 30 minutes to answer questions that you send in and submit. And Michael, Dinesh, you may be called on for your insights. So Dinesh, we might hijack a few minutes of your next Friday, guys, to help answer some questions. We always like to do a follow-up. It's only 30 minutes, so make sure that you join us then for our podcast. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. Love doing this with all of you. Be safe, be healthy, and stay digital at home.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.